All right, ladies and gentlemen, so three source analysis, one of the two major written assignments that we have to do here in Social 30-1. How do you do it? What do you do? So it's something that you should have practiced in grade 9, in grade 10, in grade 11, and now we need to practice it as well here in grade 12 and do one more formal one here together in class. So guys, as it says on the screen, right, you should see it there. The three source analysis is where you demonstrate a certain skill set, the skill set of your ability to interpret a source or a set of sources, right? In the case of three source, obviously there's three of them, and relate it to critical course content, right? Whether it is ideologies, capitalism, socialism, Nazism, communism, Stalinism, Leninism, whatever it happens to be. And then you will also link that particular source that you're talking about to liberalism, which is a very vast topic. And we'll talk about how you link that to liberalism further on in the video here. Once you do that, 3 times, right? Analyze the source, tell me what's going on, link it to relevant social studies, and then link it to liberalism within the source, right? Repeat that 3 times for each of the individual sources. You move on to the last paragraph. And that last paragraph is what we like to refer to as the links paragraph. The links paragraph is where you find a not so ordinary link between the three sources. The one thing I want to warn you all about is the idea of if you say something like the link between the three sources is liberalism, that's not good enough. No, don't do that, okay? Same thing if you were in grade 10, right? When you were learning about globalization, if you say the link amongst the three sources is globalization, well, no kidding. That's what the course is about. In grade 11, if you were like the link to between the three sources is nationalism, well, no kidding. That's what the course is about. We need to be more specific when it comes to the link amongst the three sources. So guys, as far as how this is assessed, I'll talk about this more in a subsequent video, but there's 12 marks for the three sources. Each source is marked out of 4, and there's 5 criteria from a P all the way to an E. A P represents 20%, and then an L is 40, an S is 60, a PF is an 80, and then way at the top is the E, which is 100. So that is each of those paragraphs is out of 4 marks, and that's sort of looking at this right here. And then you have your relationships paragraph, which is out of 6 marks. So that 4th paragraph, in fact, is worth the most marks. Because it is worth the most marks, you're going to spend the most time on it amongst the 4 paragraphs. That's where the men are separated from the boys and the women are separated from the girls. And then lastly, 2 marks is given for communication, right? Things like proper sentence structure, use of grammar, use of proper sentence mechanics, the vocabulary you choose, how you organize the sentence or the analysis, how it flows all together, all that kind of stuff. So remember, this is a formal written assignment. It's not an essay, right? There is no introduction. There is no conclusion. It is 4 paragraphs. Source 1 for the first paragraph, source 2 for the second, source 3 for the third, and then 4th paragraph, that one, can't move my pinky independently, right? That last paragraph is where you demonstrate your understanding of a relationship amongst all 3 of them. So let's just move down. Now, guys, when you get the 3 source analysis, you will have a box after your 3 sources that looks very much like this. And it says, write a response in paragraph form in which you must. I want to cue you to the word must. The word must means you have to. It is not optional. And if you don't do it, it will cost you. So it says you must, the first bullet right here says, interpret each source and demonstrate your understanding of how each source links to liberalism. I'm going to tell you guys right now, amongst the sources you are going to get for this assignment, you're either going to link to modern liberalism, classical liberalism, or that third fork in the road now, right? Number 3 is a rejection of liberalism. And we'll talk about, if it is rejecting liberalism, how do you deal with it, right? If it's advocating for small, unobtrusive government, then it's classical liberal, right? John Locke, Adam Smith, all those classical liberal philosophers that we've spoken about. If it is advocating for large government, that is still technically liberal, right? It's advocating for like social programs, anything like that, then it is modern liberalism, right? And remember, guys, modern liberalism uses socialist mechanisms in order to try to create a better society. And then again, that third link to liberalism could possibly be a rejection of liberalism. And again, we'll talk about that. We'll get to that. Now, after that, right, you do that for each source, that first bullet, it says, and second bullet, explain one or more of the relationships that exist among all 3 sources. The link that you come up with must discuss all 3 sources, right? It has to. It can't just be 2 of the sources are considered in your link and 1 is ignored. If you do that, you will do poorly when it comes to this mark right here, right? Your relationships out of 6. It has to be amongst all 3 sources. All right. So moving down, how do you handle a full 3-source analysis? So remember, guys, the overall topic of Social 30 is liberalism, right? Remember, liberalism is based upon this idea of freedom, right? Liberty. So again, guys, classical liberalism, make sure you know what it is. Modern liberalism, make sure you know what it is. It'd be wise of you to review that before you do this written assignment. So it says, make sure you have an acute understanding of what liberalism is and what it's not. Make sure you do. Now, number 2, it says, when you get a source, right, read the source and jot down your initial impressions. And we've done this already before together, right? When I get an individual source, I like to write down on paper what I initially see, what pops into my head when I see it, and what's the overall message of the source, right? Is it socialist? Is it capitalist? Is it modern liberal? Would a person on the left agree? Would a person on the right disagree? Right? All of those things. Now, number 3 says, look in the footnotes, endnote section of the assignment and read where the source comes from. Sometimes you'll have a footnote or an endnote on the assignment, and it might give you a little bit more clues as to what the ideological persuasion of that source actually is. So have a look for that. It might not be there, but if it is, you don't want to ignore it. Now, moving back to number 4, it says once you've checked out, who the source is by, in the footnotes endnote section, right? Reread the source. Maybe by reading the footnotes or endnotes, you're like, oh, wow, you know what? My interpretation of that source was actually wrong. So have a look at it again and make sure you still see the same things. And then number 5 says, identify the ideology present in the source. Remember, the source generally breaks down into classical liberal or modern liberal or rejection of liberalism. If the source, now, it's rejection of liberalism if the source is, let's say, a piece of propaganda from the days of Lenin or Stalin, or let's say it is a speech from Adolf Hitler that is attacking and scapegoating Jews in Germany. You know what I mean? Like, guys, if it has anything to do with like Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Kim Jong-un today, whatever it happens to be, you cannot call them liberal, right? What they do isn't liberal. Where the political or economic or where the political system advocates for murder, it is inherently not liberal, right? Liberal ideology has to do with nations that are bound by and actually follow constitutions. So now, guys, with this idea of the rejection of liberalism, be on the lookout for like communism on the far left or fascism on the far right. If it's authoritarian or totalitarian, do not link it to classical or modern liberalism, right? The best way you can handle a source like that is as a rejection of liberalism. All right, number 6, it is best to always be specific when it comes to the type of liberalism or rejection of liberalism present in the source, and specificity is what separates students who do not generally do that strong, right? Get a 60 versus students who do quite well, which is an 80 or a higher. What I'm trying to say here, guys, is when you link your source to liberalism, when you're done at like telling me what's going on in the source, right? Giving me some historical context, relating it to the key course concepts that we've looked at. Once you get to the point where you're like in source, number 1, the link to liberalism is, right? And then you identify it, you need to discuss it in some significant detail. I do not want to see you having your link to liberalism be simply one sentence at the end of this beautiful analysis, right? A major part of that actual first part of the assignment where you analyze the sources is your link to liberalism. Okay, I cannot stress that enough. Make sure you do that. Now, number 7 says identify key people, events, understandings, dates, etc. associated with the type of liberalism present in the source. So if you can link the source to someone like John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Montesquieu, Voltaire, Edmund Burke, John Stuart Mill, Smith, Marx, FDR, whoever it happens to be, then make sure you do that. By doing that, you're demonstrating an understanding of key course concepts, and that will bring your mark up. So if you can, do it. And if you can't, and you can't see it in the source, then don't, right? Just don't. But if you can, then you do. Now, number 8 says, after you've done all of this front matter, proceed to write, keeping each source's analysis between 12 to 15 minutes. Now, we know that in the nanny state that is Alberta now, that every student gets double time. Just because you get double time doesn't mean you have to take double time, right? This assignment has always been made from the beginning to take between 45 minutes to 1 hour. So 45 minutes to an hour is your total amount of time for all 4 paragraphs. Now, you can have up to 2 hours. Why? Because again, that's just the luxury that all people have now. But be aware of your time. If you are sinking, a half hour or 45 minutes into one source, that is going to be at the peril of your other 2 sources, right? And possibly even your links paragraph. So make sure you're being cognizant of the time. Now, number 9, let me just scroll down here. Number 9 says, once you have written the analysis of the individual sources, the last thing you need to do is identify one or more relationships between the sources. Now, again, I spoke about this. I'll say it again. This assignment, this is the difficult part of this assignment, where you have to basically make a link between sources that may appear to have no link. That's where the thinking comes in. And please understand, guys, like the link could be a positive link, right? Like all 3 sources reject strong government which controls people, or it could be the link might be something like, to what extent should government restrict the voting system to ensure the best possible outcome in the political realm, or something like that, right? And then you could have 2 sources that agree with the idea of restricting voting, and one source that staunchly says that all people should be allowed to vote, right? So that's a little bit more difficult to do. But again, you might be in situations where you have to have sort of one of those to what extent type of statements where you are then like talking about how two sources agree but one disagrees with this, and then you articulate and you elaborate and you substantiate, right? So it says the last thing you need to do is identify one or more relationships between the sources. This is the difficult part of assignment number 1. Whatever you say in terms of the relationships, it must be better than all three sources have liberalism in common, or something like the link amongst all three sources is liberalism. That's just not good enough. That's way too general. So 9A says, remember that relationships can be positive. Both source 1 and 3 are advocating for the state to use modern liberal approaches, or they may be negative. Source 1 is looking to see the state increase welfare subsidies for the poor, whereas source 3 is looking to slash welfare payments for individuals, as is believed that the welfare state enables human dependence and laziness, right? So again, that link amongst the sources can be, and it is, a bit of a trickier thing to do. Now, number 10 says the last part, our paragraph, is the major component of this assignment, and it needs to be done in some serious depth. Again, it is 6 marks out of 20. The other sources are each, or the other paragraphs, right, where you're analyzing each of the sources, each of the 3 sources, is worth 4 marks. So this last paragraph is worth more. So this last paragraph is the major component of this assignment, and it needs to be done in some serious depth. You must come up with an overall theme that relates all 3 sources together. A general theme equals a general mark, which equals an S. A specific theme is a much better mark, and you'll probably get somewhere like a PF. And if your theme is insightful, then you will get an insightful mark, which is an E. Now, once you have come up with an overall theme amongst them and thoroughly explained it, right, this is number 11 now, then and only then do you move on and compare and contrast individual sources and come up with sub-themes amongst them. So once you identify your common theme amongst all 3 sources and you explain it in some good depth for the first source, and then explain it in some good depth for the second source, and then explain it again for some good depth for the third source, then you can compare and contrast source 1 and 2, 1 and 3, and 2 and 3, right? It's not 100% necessary, but we find marking diploma exams that the better 3-source analysis do this. So if you're looking to really knock it out of the park, then it would be wise for you to, after you go into some really serious depth explaining your link amongst all 3 of the sources, to compare and contrast individual sets of sources. Now it says generally the better students do both, right? They explain that theme 3 times, once for one time for each of the sources, and then they do the sub-themes. And it says, overall, this assignment should take about 1 hour. Be aware of your time and ensure you leave sufficient time for your position paper. Well, look at that. We're not doing that. We don't have a diploma exam. We don't have to sweat that right now, right? And then number 15 says, have fun. Writing is where truly your ability or lack thereof is able to shine. So make sure you take some time, guys, and you go through this guide. And if you have questions, make sure you let me know, right? I will give you 2 hours to do this assignment. And yeah, once you're done sort of deal, right? So make sure you understand it. I'm also going to put some links in the modules below and also a checklist below this to former 3-source analysis, so you can look at the an S, a PF, and an E for the different years that we've had for the diploma exam writing. And they're very helpful, right? Have a look at them. Those are out there to help you as a student see what other students have done in the past, being in the same situation as you. All right, that is it. Peace. I love you guys, and we will check you later.